My name is Robert, and I worked as a night security guard at a mid-sized office park in downtown Phoenix, Arizona for 9 years. The job was straightforward and mostly uneventful. I would arrive at 10 p.m., make rounds every 2 hours through the various office buildings, monitor security cameras, check doors and locks, and respond to any alarms or disturbances. For 9 years, the work was predictable and secure, until the night I encountered something that shattered my understanding of reality. It was around 2:30 a.m. on a Tuesday night in late August. I was in the main security office, monitoring the bank of security cameras displaying all the parking lots, hallways, and building entrances. The weather was exceptionally hot that evening. Typical Phoenix summer heat that persisted even after dark. I was reviewing footage from earlier in the evening when I noticed something unusual on camera 7, which monitored the east parking lot. There was a figure standing between two parked cars in the dimly lit lot. The figure appeared to be male, approximately 6 feet tall, wearing what looked like dark work clothes. The strange thing was that this figure had been standing in the exact same spot for the past 47 minutes, completely motionless. No movement, no shifting weight, nothing. Just standing there staring directly at the camera. This was extremely unusual. In 9 years, I had never seen anyone stand that still for that long in a parking lot in the middle of the night. I immediately grabbed my flashlight and went outside to investigate. When I reached the east parking lot, I saw the figure immediately. Even from a distance, I could see it was a man in dark clothing, standing between two cars, seemingly staring in my direction. I called out, "Hey, this is private property. Can I help you?" The figure didn't respond. It didn't turn its head. It didn't acknowledge my presence at all. I walked closer, my hand on my pepper spray just in case. As I approached, something deeply unsettling occurred to me. The figure cast no shadow. The parking lot lights shone from multiple angles, creating shadows for every car, every post, every object in the lot. But this figure cast no shadow whatsoever. I stopped walking and stared at the figure more carefully. It was definitely there. I could see it clearly. Approximately 30 feet away. Male, dark clothing, but no shadow. That's when I realized another disturbing detail. I couldn't see the figure's face. It was completely dark where the face should have been, not covered, just an absence of features. Like looking at a silhouette, but more than that. Like looking at a void shaped like a man. My instinct was pure flight. Every biological alarm in my body was screaming that something was profoundly wrong. I turned around and ran back toward the security office. I didn't look back. I ran as fast as my 52-year-old legs could carry me. I immediately went to the security camera controls and rewound the footage from camera 7. What I saw on the monitors chilled me to my core. The footage showed an empty parking lot. No figure, no man, no silhouette, nothing. The parking lot was completely empty throughout the entire time period when I was watching the live feed and seeing the figure standing there. I switched back to the live feed. The figure was gone. I spent the rest of that night reviewing every camera angle of that parking lot. I found no figure. I found no explanation. The figure had been visible to my eyes in the parking lot, but was not recorded by the security cameras. When I looked back at the live feed, it had vanished. I called my supervisor the next morning and reported the incident. He suggested I was tired and might have been seeing things, a trick of the light and exhaustion. But I knew what I had seen. I knew it was real. Over the next 2 weeks, I conducted research about the office park's history. I discovered that in 1997, a security guard had been found dead in the east parking lot, apparently of a heart attack. His name was David. He was 54 years old. He had been a night security guard. The official report indicated he had been found by the morning shift, still in his uniform, standing between 2 cars in the exact location where I saw my figure. When I saw the old security photo of David from the 1990s, my hands trembled. The clothing was different. 1990s style work uniform instead of modern clothing, but the build was similar. The height seemed consistent. And most disturbingly, in the grainy photograph, I couldn't quite make out the guard's face clearly. It was dark, blurred, indistinct. I submitted my resignation 3 days later. I couldn't work there anymore. I couldn't spend another night in that office park knowing what I had seen. I don't know if the figure was David's ghost, some residual paranormal manifestation, or something else entirely. But I know with absolute certainty that I saw something that defied logical explanation. I still live in Phoenix. I still see that office park occasionally when I drive past. But I never go inside. I never look too carefully at that parking lot. And I certainly never work night security again. My name is Marcus, and I worked as a parking garage attendant at the downtown Denver parking facility for 5 years. My job involved collecting payments, directing vehicles, monitoring the garage, and ensuring security. The garage was a massive multi-level structure 8 stories tall, with hundreds of parking spaces, dimly lit corridors, and concrete pillars creating a maze-like environment. Most nights were routine. Occasionally I'd encounter drunk drivers, lost customers, or minor mechanical issues. But the graveyard shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., was always the quietest, most uneventful part of the job. That changed on a cold February night at 3:15 a.m. I was in my booth on the ground level when I heard a voice echoing through the parking garage. It was a woman's voice, faint but distinct, calling out, "Help. Please, help me." The voice seemed to come from somewhere deep in the garage, reverberating off the concrete walls and pillars, creating an eerie, disorienting acoustic effect. I immediately grabbed my radio and called out to see if there was an emergency. No one responded. The voice came again, louder this time. "Please, someone, help me." This was my job responsibility. If someone was in distress, I needed to respond. I locked up my booth and grabbed my flashlight. The garage at 3 a.m. was an oppressive place. The fluorescent lights created islands of illumination, separated by vast areas of darkness. The concrete seemed to absorb sound, creating an unnatural silence except for the woman's voice. I began following the voice deeper into the garage, moving through level 2, level 3, level 4. The voice always seemed just ahead of me, around the next corner, behind the next pillar. But every time I reached where I thought the voice came from, there was nothing, no woman, no person, just empty parking spaces and concrete. After 45 minutes of searching, I found myself on level 6, completely lost in the maze of the garage. The voice had stopped. I was alone in the darkness, surrounded by empty parking spaces and the oppressive concrete structure. That's when I heard a new sound: footsteps. Heavy footsteps on the concrete, moving toward me. I spun around, shining my flashlight in the direction of the sound. In the beam of my light, I saw a woman standing about 20 feet away. She was wearing what appeared to be 1970s-style clothing, a brown dress. Her hair styled in that era's fashion. Her skin was deathly pale. Most disturbing, she seemed to be fading, becoming translucent, disappearing before my eyes like a photograph being erased. Her mouth opened, and she spoke one final time. "Thank you for trying." Then she was gone. I ran out of that garage as fast as I could. I didn't go back to my booth. I went directly to the garage manager's office and reported the incident, describing the woman and her 1970s appearance. The manager looked deeply uncomfortable. He took me to his office and pulled out an old newspaper clipping from 1974. The headline read, "Woman Missing in Downtown Denver Parking Garage." The photograph showed a woman in a brown dress, the exact woman I had seen. The article explained that Margaret Hayes had been working as a parking garage attendant in 1974 when she disappeared from this very garage. Her body was never found. She had simply vanished without a trace. The case remained unsolved for decades. The manager explained that over the years, several employees had reported hearing a woman's voice calling for help from deep within the garage. Most dismissed it as urban legend or employees playing pranks. But the consistency of the reports and the fact that multiple employees independently described seeing a woman in 1970s clothing suggested something paranormal was occurring. I submitted my resignation the next morning. I couldn't work in a parking garage where a 50-year-old missing person's ghost was apparently trapped, endlessly calling for help. The thought of that woman's final words, "Thank you for trying," still haunts me. Margaret never received the help she needed in 1974. She remains trapped in that concrete structure, her voice echoing through the darkness, eternally calling to anyone who might listen. I was honored to be the first person in decades to answer her call, even if I couldn't help her escape. My name is Thomas, and I manage the night shift at a massive distribution warehouse outside Atlanta, Georgia. The warehouse was enormous, over 200,000 square feet, filled with towering metal racks of inventory, extending 30 feet high, creating a labyrinth of steel and products. The job involves supervising 15 to 20 workers during the night shift, managing inventory, coordinating shipments, and ensuring safety compliance. Most nights were busy and chaotic, with constant movement and activity. But on March 3rd at 2 a.m., everything became absolutely silent. I was in my office reviewing paperwork when I realized something was wrong. The warehouse was supposed to be active workers moving products, forklifts beeping, machinery operating. But there was complete silence. I checked the warehouse floor. What I found was impossible. All the workers were gone. Not in the bathrooms, not on break, not anywhere. Completely vanished. The warehouse lights were on, the equipment was idle, but not a single person was visible. I immediately checked the security log to see if they had clocked out. They hadn't. The system showed all staff members currently clocked in. Then I heard a sound like something falling from the high racks, a metallic crash from deep within the warehouse. I called out, but no one responded. I grabbed my radio and began searching. As I moved deeper into the warehouse, I started seeing shadows, dark silhouettes moving between the towering racks. At first, I thought they were my workers, but the movements were wrong, too fluid, too smooth, almost gliding rather than walking. I followed one of the shadows, weaving between the racks. The warehouse seemed to stretch endlessly, the racks creating a disorienting maze. The shadow I was following occasionally became visible, a dark humanoid shape, with no clear features, moving with impossible grace through the narrow aisles. As I pursued it, other shadows appeared. 3, then 5, then dozens of them. Dark figures moving silently through the warehouse, weaving between racks, appearing and disappearing in the shadows. They seemed to be watching me. I ran. Without thinking, without logic, I simply ran from the warehouse. I burst through the employee entrance and ran to my vehicle in the parking lot, not looking back. When I returned to the warehouse with police, everything was back to normal. All the workers were at their stations, confused about why I was there with police. According to them, they had been working continuously without interruption. They had no memory of vanishing. The security log showed no time gaps. The warehouse system showed everyone had been clocked in continuously. The police found nothing unusual, no evidence of anything wrong. The workers thought I had experienced some kind of episode. But what disturbed me most was the conversation I had with James, one of my longest-term warehouse workers. I asked him privately if he had noticed anything strange. His face went pale. He told me that dozens of people had died in that warehouse over the decades, accidents with the racks, machinery failures, overdoses in the break room, suicides. People who had died within those walls. He said many employees had reported seeing shadows moving through the racks, especially at night. Some had quit because of it. He revealed something else. The warehouse was built on the site of a 1950s textile factory, where a major fire had killed over 40 workers. The racks had been built over the exact location where the main factory building once stood. I resigned immediately. I couldn't manage a warehouse haunted by the spirits of dozens of deceased workers, their shadows eternally moving through the racks, watching the living trapped in the building where they died. Thomas, I now work day shift at a different facility, but I will never forget the dozens of shadows moving through the warehouse that night, or the knowledge that I was surrounded by the dead, watching me from the darkness between the racks. My name is Catherine, and I worked as a night shift dispatcher for a taxi company in Chicago for 8 years. My job involved answering phones, taking ride requests, assigning drivers, and tracking vehicles. I worked from a small dispatch office attached to the main taxi terminal, taking calls from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The job was usually straightforward. Handle ride requests, coordinate pickups and deliveries, manage driver schedules. Most nights were routine and predictable, but on November 18th, at 3:30 a.m., I received a call that haunted me for years. The phone rang, and a man's voice came through, speaking clearly but with an odd, distant quality. He said, "I need a taxi from the old Ashland station. I'm on the south platform. Can you send someone?" The Ashland station was long abandoned, closed since 1995. It had been a commuter rail station, but was now a condemned, boarded-up structure that the city had been meaning to demolish. I checked the address and recognized it immediately. I told the caller that Ashland Station was closed and abandoned, but he insisted, "No, it's open. I'm here. Please, I need a taxi home." Something in his voice compelled me to take the request seriously. I assigned driver Michael to the location and asked him to investigate. Michael called back 5 minutes later, confused and disturbed. "Catherine, the station is completely abandoned. It's boarded up, no lights, no one is here, but the weird thing is I just heard someone calling my name from inside the building. A man's voice, but it sounded distant, like it was coming from far away." I apologized and told him to return, but the original caller kept calling back repeatedly. Each time he became more desperate. "Please, I've been waiting for hours. Please send a taxi. I need to go home." After the third call, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I called the police non-emergency line and reported the situation. They sent officers to investigate the abandoned station. What the police discovered was deeply disturbing. In the basement of the abandoned Ashland station, they found skeletal remains. Human remains. Based on the condition and location, the remains had been there for decades. The police determined the remains belonged to a man named David Chen, who had disappeared in 1992, nearly 30 years prior. David had been a commuter rail passenger. He apparently had fallen onto the tracks and died at the station. His body had never been found, and the case remained cold. The dispatcher office received no further calls from the mysterious man after the police discovered David's remains. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had somehow assisted David's ghost in finally being discovered and giving him proper burial and closure. I later learned that multiple taxi dispatchers over the years had received similar calls from the abandoned Ashland station, always at night, always requesting a taxi, always from a man sounding increasingly desperate. Most dispatchers had dismissed the calls as prank calls or mistakes. But now I understood the truth. David Chen's ghost had been calling for help for nearly 30 years, trying to get someone to notice him, to find him, to acknowledge that he had died at that station. When I finally took his call seriously and sent help, his spirit was finally able to rest. I continued working as a dispatcher for 3 more years after that incident, but I never received another mysterious call from the abandoned station. The line went silent. David Chen finally got home. My name is Jennifer, and I worked as a psychiatric nurse at Riverside State Hospital in California for 6 years. I specialized in night shift work in the psychiatric ward, caring for patients with severe mental health conditions. The work was demanding, but meaningful. Most patients were stable and receiving proper treatment. On April 7th at 2 a.m., I was completing my rounds on the 3rd floor psychiatric ward when I noticed something odd. Patient room 412 had its door slightly open. This was unusual. All psychiatric ward doors were supposed to be secured at night. I checked my assignment sheet. Room 412 was listed as empty. The patient had been discharged 3 weeks earlier. But I decided to look inside anyway. The room was occupied. A man sat on the edge of the bed, looking directly at the wall. He appeared to be in his 70s, wearing hospital clothing. His posture was hunched, his expression blank, staring at nothing. I approached him and asked, "Hello, can I help you? This room is supposed to be empty. Are you lost?" The man didn't respond. He didn't even acknowledge my presence. He simply continued staring at the wall. I called for assistance and another nurse came to help. Together we approached the patient, but something felt deeply wrong. When I tried to touch his shoulder, my hand passed through him. I actually felt the sensation of cold, not the cold of a living person, but the bone-chilling cold of something entirely wrong. The other nurse hadn't seen him. She looked at me confused. "Jennifer, there's no one here. The room is empty." But I could still see him. I could see him clearly, sitting on the bed, staring at the wall. I told the other nurse what I was seeing, and she immediately took me to the nurse's station. We pulled up the hospital records for room 412. The patient who had occupied that room was Samuel Morrison, an 78-year-old man with severe schizophrenia. He had been hospitalized for 7 years before being discharged 3 weeks earlier. But the record also contained a note that made my blood run cold. Samuel Morrison had been found dead in his apartment 2 days after discharge. Cause of death, apparent suicide. He had taken an overdose of medication. Samuel's body had been cremated, but his hospital file noted that he had spent most of his 7 years in the hospital staring at walls, catatonic and unresponsive, rarely eating, rarely engaging with reality. The nurses had documented his behavior as fixed gaze and unresponsive to stimuli. I resigned from my position immediately. I couldn't continue working in a psychiatric ward where a deceased patient was apparently trapped, endlessly staring at the wall where he'd spent 7 years of his life, unable or unwilling to move on. Over my final weeks, I spoke with other nurses about Samuel's presence. Several admitted they had felt something unusual in room 412 over the months after his death, a cold spot, a sense of sadness, the feeling of being watched. One nurse said she had heard the sound of someone breathing heavily in the empty room when no one was there. Samuel Morrison had spent 7 years catatonic in that room, staring at walls, trapped in his own mind. After discharge, he couldn't survive in the outside world and took his own life. And apparently, his spirit remained trapped in that psychiatric wardroom, still staring at walls, still caught in the catatonia that had defined his final years. I believe Samuel's ghost was trying to communicate something, trying to tell his story, trying to make sure someone acknowledged the tragedy of his existence. But trapped between worlds, unable to speak or move, he could only stare just as he had stared for 7 years while alive.